Sarah Mitchell stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, her hands trembling as she held her 3-year-old daughter Emma close. The single mother had been working double shifts at the diner, but it wasn't enough. The rent in downtown Chicago had skyrocketed and her landlord showed no mercy. With only $3,200 in her savings account and nowhere else to turn, Sarah felt the weight of desperation crushing her chest. That evening, while Emma slept on the couch they now called home, Sarah scrolled through her laptop, searching for any affordable housing option. Her eyes were red from crying when she stumbled upon an unusual auction website. There it was, a castle in rural Scotland starting bid at $3,000. The photos showed a crumbling stone structure, overgrown with ivy, windows boarded up, and what looked like centuries of neglect. The description was brief. Historic property sold as is, no inspections, buyer assumes all risks. Most people would have scrolled past, but Sarah saw something different. She saw a possibility. She saw a chance to give Emma a home, even if it meant moving across the ocean to a place she'd never been. With her heart pounding, she placed the bid using almost every dollar she had left. 3 agonizing days later, she received the email that would change everything. Congratulations. You are now the owner of Thornwick Castle. The flight to Scotland was Emma's first time on an airplane. The little girl pressed her face against the window, pointing at the clouds while Sarah fought back waves of panic. What had she done? She'd bought a castle she'd never seen, in a country where she knew no one, with money she couldn't afford to lose. But as the plane descended toward Edinburgh, something inside her whispered that this was the right choice. The taxi ride to Thornwick took 2 hours through winding Scottish countryside. The driver, a kind man named Duncan, kept glancing in his rearview mirror at the young American woman and her daughter. When they finally arrived, even Duncan seemed taken aback by the castle's condition. The structure was more deteriorated than the photos had shown. Stones had fallen from the walls, creating gaps that let in the harsh Scottish wind. The roof had several holes, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. Sarah paid Duncan and stood in the overgrown courtyard, holding Emma's hand as the taxi disappeared down the gravel road. The silence was deafening. No neighbors, no traffic, just the sound of wind whistling through the broken stones. Emma tugged at her mother's coat and said, "Mommy, is this our new house?" Sarah knelt down, brushing a tear from her cheek, and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. This is our new adventure." The first night was brutal. They slept in sleeping bags on the stone floor of what must have been the Great Hall, using flashlights because there was no electricity. The temperature dropped significantly after sunset, and Sarah wrapped Emma in every piece of clothing they'd brought. She lay awake, listening to strange creaking sounds, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Morning brought new challenges. The castle had no running water, no heat, and no modern conveniences whatsoever. Sarah walked through room after room, each one revealing new problems. The kitchen was a disaster, with an ancient stone hearth and rusted metal fixtures. The stairs to the upper floors were partially collapsed, making them dangerous to climb. But in the daylight, Sarah also began to see the castle's potential. The stonework, despite its age, was remarkably solid in most areas. The windows, though boarded up, were large and would let in beautiful natural light once restored. Emma, with the resilience that only children possess, began treating the castle like the world's largest playground. She chased imaginary dragons through the corridors and declared herself the Princess of Thornwick. Her laughter echoed through the empty halls, and for the first time since arriving, Sarah smiled genuinely. On their 3rd day, while exploring the lower levels of the castle, Sarah discovered a door she hadn't noticed before. It was smaller than the others and partially hidden behind a fallen beam. Using a crowbar she'd found in what appeared to be an old tool room, she managed to pry the door open. Behind it was a narrow stone staircase leading down into darkness. Sarah's heart raced as she descended the steps, flashlight in hand. The air grew colder and mustier with each step. At the bottom, she found herself in a large underground chamber with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling. But this wasn't just any basement. The walls were lined with what appeared to be very old paintings, and in the center of the room sat several large wooden chests. Her hands shook as she approached the first chest. The wood was dark with age, and the metal hinges were green with oxidation. When she lifted the heavy lid, Sarah gasped. Inside were dozens of small canvas paintings, each one carefully wrapped in what looked like silk cloth. Even in the dim light of her flashlight, she could see the incredible detail and craftsmanship of the artwork. The second chest contained larger paintings, some in ornate gold frames. Sarah recognized the style immediately. These looked like Renaissance-era works, the kind she'd only seen in museums. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was looking at. Could these possibly be authentic? And if so, what were they doing hidden in the basement of a castle she'd bought for $3,000? The third chest was the most surprising of all. Instead of paintings, it contained documents, old papers with official-looking seals, maps, and what appeared to be certificates of authenticity. Sarah's limited knowledge of art history wasn't enough to fully understand what she was reading, but she could make out dates from the 1400s and 1500s, and names that seemed familiar from her college art appreciation class. Emma's voice calling from upstairs snapped Sarah back to reality. She carefully closed the chests and made her way back up the stone steps, her mind spinning with possibilities. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah used her laptop's limited internet connection to research what she'd found. The more she read about Renaissance art and the history of Scottish castles, the more convinced she became that she'd stumbled upon something extraordinary. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would require every ounce of courage she possessed. She contacted the nearest university and asked to speak with someone in their art history department. Dr. Margaret Campbell, a professor specializing in Renaissance art, agreed to drive out to Thornwick Castle that afternoon. Dr. Campbell was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened patiently as Sarah explained her situation, the desperate purchase of the castle, the discovery of the hidden chamber, and her suspicions about the artwork. When Sarah led her down to the underground room, Dr. Campbell's professional composure cracked. "My dear," she whispered, examining the first painting with a magnifying glass she'd brought from her car, "I believe you may have found something quite remarkable." She spent the next 3 hours carefully examining piece after piece, taking notes and photographs. Her excitement grew with each discovery. Finally, Dr. Campbell sat back on her heels and looked at Sarah with an expression of amazement. "Sarah, I need to be very careful about what I'm telling you because I don't want to raise false hopes. But based on my preliminary examination, I believe you may have discovered a collection of Renaissance masterpieces that have been missing for centuries. If I'm correct and these pieces are authenticated, you're looking at a collection worth potentially hundreds of millions of dollars." Sarah felt the room spin around her. She sat down hard on one of the stone steps, trying to process what she'd just heard. Dr. Campbell continued, "The documents in that third chest appear to be provenance records, essentially the family tree of these paintings, showing who owned them and when. This kind of documentation is incredibly rare and valuable for authentication purposes." Over the following weeks, Dr. Campbell brought in colleagues from universities across Europe. Each expert who examined the collection became more excited than the last. The paintings were subjected to every test available: X-rays, chemical analysis, carbon dating. The results were consistent. The artwork was authentic, dating back to the Renaissance period, and included works by masters whose pieces rarely came to market. The story of how the collection ended up hidden in Thornwick Castle slowly emerged through historical research. The castle had belonged to the MacLeod family for over 400 years. During World War II, many wealthy European families had hidden their art collections to protect them from being stolen or destroyed. The MacLeods had apparently hidden their collection in the castle's basement and, for reasons lost to history, never retrieved it. When the last MacLeod heir died in the 1990s with no family to inherit the property, the castle had passed through several hands before ending up in the auction where Sarah found it. Each previous owner had apparently been unaware of the treasure hidden beneath their feet. The authentication process took 6 months. During that time, Sarah and Emma continued living in the castle, slowly making improvements with the small amount of money Sarah had left. They installed a generator for electricity, brought in a water tank, and made the Great Hall livable. Emma started attending the local village school, quickly making friends despite her American accent. The villagers of Thornwick had initially been curious about the young American woman who'd bought their local castle, but they quickly embraced Sarah and Emma as part of their community. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the village store, became like a grandmother to Emma. James McPherson, a local handyman, helped Sarah with basic repairs in exchange for meals. The community's warmth helped Sarah feel less alone during the stressful months of waiting for the art authentication results. When Dr. Campbell finally called with the official results, Sarah was in the castle's kitchen, making dinner for Emma. "Sarah," Dr. Campbell's voice was barely contained excitement. "I have news. The collection has been fully authenticated. You are now the owner of 47 Renaissance masterpieces, including works by Botticelli, Raphael, and Caravaggio. The conservative estimate for the collection's value is $180 million. Sarah dropped the phone. Emma looked up from her coloring book, concerned by her mother's expression. "Mommy, are you okay?" Sarah picked up the phone with shaking hands and asked Dr. Campbell to repeat what she'd said. The number was the same, $180 million. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah walked through the castle that had become their home. 6 months ago, she'd been facing eviction in Chicago, desperate and alone. Now she was the owner of one of the most significant private art collections in the world. But more than that, she'd found a community that cared about her and Emma, a home where her daughter could grow up surrounded by history and beauty. The decision about what to do with the collection wasn't easy. Sarah could sell everything and live comfortably for the rest of her life. But that felt wrong somehow. These paintings had been hidden and protected for decades. They deserved to be seen and appreciated. After months of consideration and consultation with experts, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. She would keep the collection at Thornwick Castle and open it as a museum. The castle would be restored to its former glory, with the art displayed in climate-controlled galleries built within the historic structure. The museum would provide jobs for the local community and bring visitors from around the world to the small Scottish village. The restoration project took 2 years and cost several $1,000,000, but Sarah had the resources now to do it properly. Emma, now 5 years old, delighted in watching the castle transform. Workers carefully restored the stone walls, replaced the roof, and installed modern heating and electrical systems while maintaining the building's historic character. The Thornwick Castle Museum opened on a crisp autumn morning, with visitors traveling from across Europe to see the collection. Sarah stood in the great hall, now beautifully restored with soaring ceilings and magnificent stone archways, watching people marvel at the Renaissance masterpieces that had been hidden for so long. Emma, dressed in her favorite dress, served as the unofficial junior tour guide, charming visitors with her enthusiasm and knowledge of the castle's history. She'd grown up with these paintings, and to her, they were simply part of home. Dr. Campbell, now the museum's chief curator, approached Sarah during the opening reception. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, I thought you were either very brave or very foolish to buy a castle site unseen. Now I realize you were both, and that's exactly what this place needed." Sarah smiled, watching Emma explain to a group of visitors how Botticelli had painted the flowing hair in one of his portraits. "Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you the most," she replied. The museum became a tremendous success, attracting art lovers and tourists from around the world. The revenue from admissions and the museum shop provided sustainable income for both the castle's maintenance and Sarah's family. More importantly, it brought new life to the village of Thornwick, with new businesses opening to serve the visitors and young families moving to the area for the job opportunities. 3 years after opening, Sarah received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a young single mother in Detroit who had read about Sarah's story in a magazine. The woman wrote about her own struggles with poverty and homelessness, and how Sarah's journey had inspired her to take risks and believe in possibilities she'd never considered before. Sarah realized that her story had become about more than just finding hidden treasure. It was about the courage to take chances when you have nothing left to lose, about the importance of community and belonging, and about how sometimes the most desperate decisions can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Standing in the castle's tower room, which had been converted into her private office, Sarah looked out over the Scottish countryside that had become home. Emma was in the courtyard below, playing with children from the village, her laughter carrying on the wind. The castle that had once seemed like a symbol of her desperation had become a symbol of hope, not just for her family, but for everyone who visited and heard their story. The hidden treasure had given them financial security, But the real treasure had been finding a place where they belonged, a community that embraced them, and the confidence to build something meaningful from the ruins of their old life. Sarah had bought a crumbling castle for $3,000 and found not just $180 million in art, but a new life worth far more than any monetary value could measure. Hey, my friends. Help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth. The success of the Thornwick Castle Museum brought unexpected challenges that Sarah hadn't anticipated. As word spread about the incredible discovery and the museum's opening, media attention intensified. Reporters from major news outlets around the world wanted to interview the American woman who bought a castle for $3,000 and found a fortune. While Sarah appreciated the publicity for the museum, the constant attention made her uncomfortable, especially when it came to Emma's privacy. One particular morning, Sarah woke to find 3 news vans parked outside the castle gates. Emma, now 6 years old, peered out the window and asked, "Mommy, why are all those people here again?" Sarah sighed, realizing that their quiet life in the Scottish countryside was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The situation became more complicated when Sarah received a phone call from a man claiming to be a distant relative of the MacLeod family. Robert MacLeod, calling from Edinburgh, insisted that the art collection rightfully belonged to his family, and that the sale of the castle had been conducted without proper disclosure of its contents. His voice was stern and demanding as he explained that he was consulting with lawyers about challenging Sarah's ownership of the collection. Sarah's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. The thought of losing everything they'd built terrified her. She immediately contacted her lawyer, Patricia Morrison, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in property and inheritance law. Patricia listened carefully to Sarah's concerns and assured her that the legal purchase of the castle included all contents, but she recommended documenting everything thoroughly to prepare for any potential legal challenges. Meanwhile, Emma was struggling with the attention at school. Children and teachers treated her differently now that everyone knew about the castle and the treasure. Some classmates were fascinated and wanted to be her friend only because of the castle, while others seemed resentful of her family's newfound wealth. Emma came home one afternoon with tears in her eyes, telling Sarah that a boy in her class had called her the show-off American princess. Sarah's heart broke seeing her daughter's confusion and hurt. She sat Emma down in their private living quarters, a cozy apartment they'd created in the castle's east wing, and explained that sometimes when people's lives change dramatically, it takes time for everyone to adjust. "We're still the same people we were before," Sarah told Emma, brushing her daughter's hair. "The paintings don't change who we are inside." The legal pressure from Robert MacLeod intensified over the following weeks. He hired a prominent Edinburgh law firm and began making public statements to the press, claiming that Sarah was an opportunistic American who had taken advantage of a flawed auction system. The media coverage became increasingly negative, with some outlets painting Sarah as a greedy outsider who had stolen Scotland's cultural heritage. Patricia Morrison worked tirelessly to build Sarah's defense, gathering documentation about the castle's ownership history and the legitimate auction process. She discovered that Robert MacLeod's claim to the MacLeod family line was questionable at best. He was a distant cousin several times removed, and there was no evidence that he had any legal claim to the estate or its contents. During this stressful period, the local community of Thornwick rallied around Sarah and Emma in a way that moved Sarah to tears. Mrs. Henderson organized a petition supporting Sarah's ownership, which was signed by nearly every resident of the village. James McPherson and other local workers who had helped with the castle's restoration spoke to reporters about Sarah's commitment to preserving Scottish heritage and providing jobs for the community. Dr. Margaret Campbell proved to be one of Sarah's strongest advocates. She held a press conference at the university, explaining the historical significance of the collection and how Sarah's decision to create a museum had made these masterpieces accessible to the public for the first time in centuries. Ms. Mitchell could have sold these paintings to private collectors and made them disappear from public view forever, Dr. Campbell stated firmly. Instead, she chose to share this incredible discovery with the world. The turning point came when Patricia Morrison's investigation revealed something that changed everything. While researching the MacLeod family history, she discovered that the last legitimate MacLeod heir, Moira MacLeod, had left a will that specifically stated her intention for the castle and its contents to be sold to fund educational and cultural initiatives. The will, filed with the Edinburgh Probate Court but somehow overlooked during the estate settlement, explicitly stated that any hidden family treasures should be used for the betterment of public knowledge and appreciation of the arts. When this document was presented to the court, Robert MacLeod's case collapsed entirely. Not only did he have no legitimate claim to the collection, but Moira MacLeod's will actually supported exactly what Sarah had done with the discovery. The legal victory was complete, but the emotional toll of the months-long battle had been significant for both Sarah and Emma. With the legal challenges resolved, Sarah focused on expanding the museum's educational programs. She established the Emma MacLeod Scholarship Fund, named in honor of both her daughter and the castle's previous owner, which provided art education opportunities for underprivileged children throughout Scotland. The scholarship program brought busloads of students to Thornwick Castle, where they could see Renaissance masterpieces up close and participate in hands-on art workshops. Emma, now more confident and mature from navigating the challenges of the past year, became genuinely involved in the museum's educational mission. She helped design a special children's tour that made the art accessible and exciting for young visitors. Her natural enthusiasm and knowledge of the castle's history made her a favorite among school groups, and she began to see her unique situation as an opportunity to help other children discover the joy of art and history. The museum's success continued to grow, but Sarah made deliberate choices to maintain balance in their lives. She hired a professional museum director, allowing her to step back from day-to-day operations and focus more on Emma's needs and their family life. They established routines that preserved their privacy, including specific hours when the castle's living quarters were off-limits to visitors and staff. One evening, as Sarah and Emma sat in their favorite spot, a window seat in the tower room overlooking the Scottish countryside, Emma asked a question that surprised her mother. "Mommy, do you think we would have been happy if we had stayed in Chicago and never found the paintings?" Sarah considered the question carefully, looking out at the village lights twinkling in the distance. "I think we would have found a way to be happy," Sarah replied honestly. "But I don't think we would have discovered how strong and brave we could be. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." Emma nodded thoughtfully, then added, "And we wouldn't have met Mrs. Henderson or James or Dr. Campbell. They're like our Scottish family now." As the years passed, the Thornwick Castle Museum became a model for community-based cultural institutions. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences about sustainable museum management and the importance of making art accessible to diverse audiences. She always emphasized that the real treasure hadn't been the monetary value of the paintings, but the community and sense of purpose they had discovered. The castle itself had been transformed from a crumbling ruin into a beacon of culture and education, but Sarah had been careful to preserve its authentic character. Visitors often commented on how the building felt alive with history, not like a sterile museum, but like a place where art and life coexisted naturally. Emma, now 8 years old, had grown into a confident and articulate child who spoke with equal ease to visiting dignitaries and local farmers. She was bilingual in English and Scots Gaelic, which she had learned from Mrs. Henderson, and she could discuss Renaissance art techniques with the enthusiasm of someone who had grown up surrounded by masterpieces. The financial security provided by the art collection had allowed Sarah to make choices based on values rather than desperation. She had established a trust fund for Emma's education and future, but she had also committed significant resources to preserving other historic properties in Scotland and supporting arts education programs throughout the UK. On quiet Sunday mornings, when the museum was closed and the castle was peaceful, Sarah would walk through the galleries where the Renaissance masters hung in climate-controlled perfection. She often thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate night in Chicago when she had placed a bid on a castle she'd never seen, to this moment of stability and purpose. The paintings that had been hidden in darkness for decades now brought joy and wonder to thousands of visitors each year. Children pressed their faces close to the protective glass, marveling at details painted 500 years ago. Art students sketched and studied techniques that had been lost and rediscovered. Scholars conducted research that added to the world's understanding of Renaissance art and culture. But perhaps most importantly, The castle had become a symbol of hope for people facing their own desperate circumstances. Sarah received letters regularly from individuals around the world who had heard her story and found the courage to take risks, pursue dreams, or simply believe that their situations could change. One letter that particularly moved her came from a woman in Brazil who had used her last savings to buy a small rundown coffee farm. Inspired by Sarah's story, she had persevered through difficulties and eventually built a successful, sustainable coffee business that now employed dozens of people in her community. "Your courage to buy that castle gave me courage to bet on myself," the woman wrote. As Sarah stood in the Great Hall one evening watching Emma practice a presentation she was giving to a group of visiting art students the next day, she reflected on how their definition of wealth had evolved. The $180 million art collection had provided financial security, but the real richness in their lives came from the relationships they had built, the community they had joined, and the purpose they had discovered. The castle that had once seemed like a desperate gamble had become the foundation for a life neither Sarah nor Emma could have imagined. They had found not just hidden treasure, but a hidden version of themselves, stronger, braver, and more capable than they had ever known. The crumbling walls had been rebuilt, but more importantly, so had their confidence in the future and their belief in the power of taking chances when everything seems lost. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.